Hi, I'm Jaimin and I'm a first-year economics undergraduate at the University of Cambridge Homerton College. And today I'll be taking you through how to smash the Economics Admissions Assessment (ECAA) entrance exam. I'll be taking you through this in four main parts. Firstly, talking about what the ECAA entails and the different sections in it. Then secondly, talking about the scores that I got when I sat the entrance exam and what scores you should be aiming for. Thirdly, talking about some specific advice for each of the different sections within the ECAA. And lastly, giving some general advice and general pointers about how to ace this entrance exam. Now, a general explanation of the different parts of the ECAA. It's a 2-hour exam. It's done during around October half term, or sometimes a little bit after October half term, as it has been in recent years. And there are no calculators allowed. And the exam itself is composed of two main parts, Section 1 being more maths related, and Section 2 being more essay related. Section 1 itself can be broken into two different parts. Section 1A is your regular mathematics. So it's things such as geometry, algebra, ratios and proportion, and that is for half an hour. You have 20 multiple choice questions to do. Then the second bit, that's your more advanced mathematics section. And that comprises of things such as calculus, trigonometry, logarithms, exponentials. Again, 20 multiple choice questions to do within half an hour. Then section 2, which is the essay section, that is for 1 hour itself. And you're given an extract that's roughly a page, sometimes a page and a half, 2 pages. And you have to write an answer to a question that's given. And you don't have a choice of the question that you can answer. Normally, the question will be on something that's very economics related. One thing that I would like to add is that when you sit your ECAA entrance exam, the maths section, which is composed of the normal maths for half an hour and the advanced maths for half an hour, that will all be within 1 hour. So you can choose to allocate your time between the two however you want. So if you finish the normal maths within 25 minutes, for example, then you can of course spend 35 minutes on the advanced maths. But Cambridge themselves recommend that you should spend half an hour on the first section and half an hour on the second section. The essay is a separate part of the paper, so of course you only have 1 hour to spend on that. In terms of the scores that you want to be aiming for, the ECAA is marked on a standardized scale from 1 to 9. The average applicant will get a score of roughly 4. Then if you're a strong applicant, you'll have a score of 5 or above. If you're very strong, you have a score of 6 and above. And if you really want to stand out from the other applicants, you should be aiming for a score of 6.5 and above. Now, it's really quite difficult to convert the percentage score that you get in the ECAA exam into the standardized score because it changes every year. With some research and with some Googling, you can sometimes actually find the conversion charts. So if you do find a conversion chart, then save that paper for quite late in your practice, and then you can roughly see where you're at. In terms of the scores that I got, my college, Homerton, they unfortunately didn't tell me the standardized score that I got, but they told me roughly where I sat percentage-wise in comparison to the rest of the applicants. For Section 1A, I was in the top 30% of applicants. For Section 1B, I was in the top 10% of applicants. And for Section 2, the essay, I was in the top few percent of applicants. I was really nervous when I went in, which meant that the first maths section didn't go as well as I wanted it to, but thankfully I made up for it in the latter parts of the exam. So if you come out of the exam thinking that some of the bits didn't go as well as you wanted, or if you're sat in the exam thinking that perhaps the maths didn't go as you wanted, don't lose hope, because in an ideal world, of course, you'd want to smash every single bit of it. But if you can make up for it in other parts of it, then it will still show that you're a strong applicant. Now I'm going to move on to some of the specific advice for each of the different sections in the ECAA, starting off firstly with Section 1A. The biggest piece of advice that I can give you really for the entire exam is to make sure that you read the question really carefully. Reading it, underlining bits, highlighting bits, starring bits, whatever method works for you. Because the exam is so time pressured that it's really easy to drop lots of marks simply because you didn't understand the question, just because you didn't read it correctly. The next piece of advice that I would give would be to make sure that you use the options that you've been given. The maths section of the ECAA, Section 1A and 1B, are both multiple choice. So making sure that you use the options that you've been given and eliminating some of them can really help you and mean that you save time during the exam, which is crucial. The next tip that I can give you is brushing up on your mental maths. Obviously, there's no calculator allowed. So even simple things such as solving quadratics, that's something where at A level you tend to use your calculator a lot more for that rather than actually using the quadratic formula or solving it by hand. Getting into the habit of using mental maths and familiarizing yourself with ways to solve quadratics by hand, ways to do other bits of maths that you would have done on the calculator by hand, that will help you do really well in the exam. And the final bit of advice that I can give you for section 1A is to draw diagrams. That's because the difficulty with 1A may come with some of the geometry questions, and that's what I personally found. They'd give you a chunk of information and it would seem impossible at first, but when you actually use that information to draw a diagram, it makes it a lot easier. It doesn't need to be a beautifully labeled, neat diagram, just a really quick sketch of a graph or a triangle or anything like that. Section 1B, which is the advanced section, all of the tips that I stated for section 1A are very useful and still valid for 1B. 1B will have all of the concepts that are present within 1A, as well as the advanced things, trigonometry, differentiation, integration, and so on. The first one being that skipping questions is okay. In 1B, you will find some questions that you look at and read and just think, how on earth am I meant to do this? And if you were to sit there and do it, it would take you 10 minutes, let alone how much time you actually have to do per question in the exam. If you're partway through a question and you're not able to find the answer and it's taking you too long, then again, skipping is okay. This isn't an exam where you're aiming to get full marks or you're aiming to make sure you do every question perfectly. The way to do well is to actually know when to stop doing a question. And there'll be specific questions that you're not familiar at, specific questions that you're really good at, and just again make sure that you can recognize which ones you're better at and which ones you're worse at. For me personally, some of the visualization questions and logic questions about nets of cubes, they would really throw me. So as soon as I saw them, I would simply move on. The next piece of advice I can give you is to try and visualize the method that you're going to use to answer a question. Let me explain this in a little bit more detail. As you read the question and think about what method you're going to use, in your head you kind of lay out some of the steps. So if you see an integration question with some constants in it equaling something, then perhaps you know that the approach to use is just to do the algebraic integration, set both sides equal to each other, and then just rearrange. And you're fairly certain that that will work. Doing something as simple as that will save you a lot of time and will make sure that the method you're using is hopefully correct. And for the more complicated scenarios, it comes with practice. So practice makes perfect. The next tip that I can give you is to write down all formulae that you think might be necessary, especially for geometry questions or ones involving cylinders, spheres. Writing down some of the surface area formulae or volume formulae can prove to be really useful. And they're especially useful when it involves combining two formulae together, and that is sometimes apparent in some of the harder 1B questions. The final bit of advice that I can give you is to make sure that you can recognize the standard types of questions. So in 1B, one of the main types of questions that will come up is quadratics and all of the variation of quadratics. So in your studies of maths at AS and A level, you would have seen that you can have a quadratic in exponents. So an example off the top of my head is 2 to the power 2x plus 3 times 2 to the x plus 7 equals 0. And that is simply a quadratic in 2 to the x. So if you saw that, and if you've done lots and lots of practice and been able to recognize that it's that type of question, then you don't even need to think. You can just recognize that it's a quadratic in 2 to the x, do it really quickly and get the answer in the required amount of time that you have. So it's all of the different variations of that and simply making sure that you recognize the specific type of question and what the question is asking as many times as you can. In terms of section 2 of the ECAA, which is the essay part of the exam, the first thing that I can say about it is that it's designed to test how you think and not about what you know. That's a recurring theme in a lot of the Oxbridge process in terms of the entrance exams, in terms of the interviews. It's more a test of how you think. So the essay that you'll be given, or the extract that you'll be given, it may be on a topic that you're completely familiar with, it may be on a topic that you don't know at all. Bottom line, don't worry, because they're not really expecting that much background knowledge about that topic. If you can chuck in some really niche facts about it, which are somewhat related to it, great, that's what I did. And that, I think that might be why I did quite well in it. But if you're not able to, don't worry, because they place a lot more emphasis on the logic of your argument rather than the, should we say, content and the facts and figures that are behind it. In addition to this, If you are putting in niche facts and figures, you want to make sure that they are actually relevant to the essay question in the extract, because you can lose marks if you include a lot of material that isn't actually relevant to the question. It shows that you're not being precise, it shows that you don't have an understanding of what the question is asking exactly, so it can really work against you. The way to approach the essay is to firstly, of course, read the extract. And you want to spend around 10-ish minutes reading the extract, underlining things, highlighting things, making notes on it. One thing that I did is, if there was a concept in the extract that I knew something about, I would draw a line and just quickly write down a couple of bullet points about that topic. Then afterwards, you want to spend 5 minutes reading the question, properly understanding what the question is asking, and then making a short plan. And in your plan, you want to include the introduction, the main body paragraphs, and the conclusion. But put more emphasis on the main body, because the introduction and conclusion is really just a summary of what that is. That leaves around 45 minutes to do the actual essay, which is, trust me, plenty of time to do it. In the introduction, you want to define the key terms and you want to briefly lay out the main things you're going to say in your main body paragraphs. Then, when you get onto your main body, you want to use point evidence explain or point evidence evaluate, whatever the question is asking. But the logic behind your arguments is the most important thing. And if you can make that logic really innovative, if you can think of a niche point that others perhaps wouldn't have thought of, that will really work in your favor. So spend some time when you're reading and planning, really thinking about what the most niche and most innovative points are that you could put down. And you want to repeat that for around 3 paragraphs. If the question is something about discuss advantages and disadvantages, or here's a statement, do you agree, then you want at least 2 paragraphs, 1 for and 1 against. If you can fit more in, then that's great. I used to aim for a minimum of around 3. After that, you have your conclusion at the end. You want to leave sufficient time for your conclusion, normally around 5 minutes. And that's because the conclusion is the final thing that the examiner will read, and that might actually be something that's quite significant in determining the grade that they'll give you. Make sure that in your conclusion, you include something that impresses them massively. The best way to do that is to include another argument that you didn't consider before, or to include another niche fact or figure. It can be from the extract or it can be from your own knowledge, that really supports the view that you hold, especially if it's, again, a question where it's one view versus another view, or advantages and disadvantages. That's the best way to approach the essay and the most methodical way to approach it. We move on to our final section now, which is just some general advice about each of the sections. Firstly, with regards to maths, practice in time conditions. The exam is so time pressured, and when you add on top of that the nerves, the difficulty of sitting in the exam hall and so on, best way to combat that is just to make sure that you're familiar with the timings that are present in the paper. The second thing that I can say is to make sure that you ration the past papers, because unfortunately the ECAA is actually quite new. I think it dates back to around 2016. The past papers for the new spec are only from 2020 onwards. So there aren't that many past papers that you can use. So it's really important to make sure that you're using them when, number one, you feel more prepared, and number two, closer to the exam. And in the meantime, think about different books that you can buy online or perhaps get off older students. And also consider doing questions from the Tamura and the MAT. Tamura, you can do all of the different questions because they're multiple choice. MAT, focus mainly on the first 10 multiple choice questions. The longer answer questions won't be relevant to the ECAA. Use all of those different resources and use them to create perhaps your own past papers. So a past paper that is composed of Tamura questions and then an extract that you found somewhere, or one that's composed of MAT multiple choice questions. That will help you to get familiar with the timing to the absolute best of your ability before the exam. A final bit of advice that I would add for the general math section is that you want to make sure you've looked through the math specification. And that's simply found on the Cambridge website, and it has the spec for the normal math section and also the advanced math section. Make sure that you've looked through it, highlighted areas that are weak, highlighted areas that you perhaps haven't gone through, if any, and just make sure you're really familiar and good with the different parts of the spec, because that's everything that's pretty much guaranteed to come up. They'll go through most of that spec in the exam. The second thing that I would add is with regards to older past papers, so 2019, 18, 17 and 16, because those use the older ECAA specification, you can by all means use them, but just use the advanced math section, which will be about 15 questions, and use the essay as well, and do those in the appropriate time conditions. So half an hour for the advanced maths, 1 hour for the essay, and then perhaps you can get a normal maths section from Tamura papers or from MAT papers or from any other resources that you find, and just create papers like that. Finally, for section 2 of the ECAA, which is the essay section, make sure you are reading The Economist. The Economist will give you facts and figures that you can throw into your ECAA essay, and they will be niche, they'll be general, they'll be on a whole host of different things that will be really helpful for you. On top of that, the language in The Economist is something that's quite prevalent and similar to the types of extracts that you'll end up getting in the actual exam. It could even be an article from The Economist as it was for our year. Ensure that you're really familiar with that style of writing and are able to understand it. You can even take that to another level by making sure that you pick articles, whether they be articles you like, articles you don't like, and write mock essays on them. Think of a question, spend an hour writing a mock essay on it, and that will be really good practice for section 2. Because section 2 tends to be the part that's neglected by a lot of students, so making sure that you've done good prep for it and making sure that you do well in it can again be another differentiator in your favor. I hope this video has been really useful in terms of giving you an insight into what the ECAA is like, how to succeed in it, and what to make sure you do and don't do. If you need any more advice about economics at Cambridge or anything else that's Oxbridge related, please do book a UniReach consultation. I wish you all the best, and go smash the ECAA.